Welcome to the new sound of online radio. Welcome to the sound of Universal Broadcasting Network. 'Cause you make me feel like I've been locked out of heaven. A mix of today's hits and hard-to-find favorites, combined with the most entertaining and intriguing talk anywhere. This is your sound. This is the sound of Universal Broadcasting Network at UBNradio.com.
Hey everyone, this is Distill It, a 360-degree view of life in sports. So happy to be here today. We are here. I'm Wendy Rosenthal with my co-host, who I'm going to let her introduce herself this time around.
I'm Eira Schwyzer. Welcome.
We're really excited to be here today because we're talking about a topic that is, I think, pretty important. I think you'll think so too. Athletes are given a really important role when they become, especially elite athletes who are very well-known and popular. They're given a platform for them to talk about personal issues, social issues. People listen.
Yeah.
And a lot of times when people are listening to what these athletes want to say, the message could really elevate and take a social issue and bring it to the attention of millions to the benefit of whatever the cause is, or sometimes it can actually backfire a little bit, both for the athlete and for the cause. And I think you'll find that this is going to be a show that, I say this all the time, that we could do over about 10 shows because there's so much depth and weight to what is going on out there in the world right now. But before we get there, I want to talk a little bit about what's been going on, actually, in the world of sports.
What's been going on, Wendy?
So, Eira, did you happen to see the Open Championship this weekend by any chance? Like, I know it's a stretch, guys. It's a big stretch.
Of all sports.
Golf?
What's the one I don't watch on TV?
That's one of the most exciting,
That's
by
what
the
you
way.
want to ask me about?
I'm going to ask you about it. I totally forgot before I asked you about this weekend.
Your hat?
No, I'm going to leave my hat for
Jarvis.
Jarvis. I want to introduce Jarvis. Jarvis is our security blanket and engineer, and he doesn't know this, but sooner or later he's going to be part of the show, not just from behind the scenes. And I want to tell you, we have a lot to talk about. Your fingers are going to be working overtime as you pull up all these images. So we want to say thank you. Okay, so back to the Open.
So now we're not talking about your hat?
No, we'll talk about my hat in a minute.
After? Okay, go ahead. No, I did not watch because I was watching. What else was going on? What else was going on, Wendy?
Copa de Oro.
Exactly. And what was the big news? What happened?
Jamaica beat Mexico in their home stadium of the Rose Bowl in Los Angeles.
Exactly. May as well have been their home stadium. Yes, at the Rose Bowl. Exactly. Huge Mexican supporters and.
What happened?
It was an amazing game. It was fantastic. But Jamaica, who's brilliant as well, came right at the end of the game. I mean, just 3 minutes left. I think it was right at the end, 1-0.
Heartbreaker.
So now tomorrow we got the big final, U.S. and Jamaica up at Levi Stadium.
Who would have thought that, by the way? The U.S. and Jamaica.
For
all of you football/soccer fans out there, it's a tough one to believe that actually that would be the
It's
final.
not a tough one. Well,
Come on.
People were more shocked with U.S., but Jamaica, this is the second time, so not a shock.
Okay.
Anyhow, I did not watch golf, but please tell us how excited you are about having watched the U.S. Open.
Well, I've been a golf fan for my whole life. I actually like to play golf, and I've always loved golf. And the interesting thing about golf is it's as with all sports, but I think with golf in particular, it's a mind game as much as it is a physical game where you have to have a good stroke and you have to have all the mechanics right. And this weekend at the Open, Jordan Spieth actually proved my point so well. He was on the 13th hole. He was tied with Matt Kuchar for, going into the home stretch.
Yeah.
Looking at a victory where he would become the youngest player ever to win the Open Championship.
Yeah.
And he hit a tee shot that was so unbelievable. Put it this way. It was a tee shot I could hit.
I love it.
Like, literally, I could have done that.
Right.
It was over on another fairway. Well, actually not on a fairway, but it was over near another fairway on a hillside that literally looked up a cliff.
Okay.
I mean, it was crazy. Anyway, after about 20 minutes of deciding what was going to happen, he came back and they dropped his ball. They gave him a penalty, and he ends up only bogeying the hole. So he only dropped one shot. So he goes into the next hole, one shot behind Matt Kuchar. Now, for me, I'm sorry, I don't know about you. Maybe you have a stronger mind than I do, but if I had been in that position, I would have, in my head, it would have been very hard to recover because it was such a bad, and his whole actually front nine was very bad. He bogeyed a lot of holes. Yeah. Anyhow, he goes on to the next hole and birdies it, and then goes on the following hole and eagles it.
Right.
And goes, 3 strokes into the lead, and actually that's where he ended up. Yeah. And the same time, Matt Kuchar did the exact opposite. So he had an opportunity to completely slay Jordan Spieth.
Sure.
And he went the opposite direction. And the reason I wanted to bring it up is not because it's very newsworthy anyway, but because of the fact that as the distillery, which is the company that Eira and I own, and where we really look at athletic intelligence as something beyond the physical abilities of any single athlete, that it's the abilities of being able to, put yourself in the right mindset to fight through uncomfortable situations. Jordan Spieth should be a poster child for us because I've never seen a performance like that ever.
Isn't that wild? It's so great.
Yeah, I mean,
and not easy to do. I mean, when you think about it, it's challenging. Period. As an athlete,
that would be Jarvis coming into the screen
to adjust my mic.
We want to make sure that you all get to see him.
I rarely speak into my mic. But that's challenging for athletes, period. You think about a group setting, a team, at least you feel like you've got the support of your teammates. Yeah. But when it's you out there,
it's all you. And it's such a head game.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been standing at a tee. Right. And honestly, one little thing can creep into my head right before I take a shot. Sure. And instead of actually hitting it straight down, into the fairway, it could go anywhere.
Anywhere else, yeah.
And I really was impressed with the mental agility and the mindset that he had to win the Open. So that's why I wanted to mention it because on top of being a big sports story this week, I think the message for our listeners and for what we're doing at the distillery is really there is nothing that you cannot do if you set your mind to it. And if you rely on the skills that you have, if you rely on your
all of the training and all the years that you put into doing this, that it just comes.
It comes back.
It comes naturally.
It comes back.
Yeah. Good
Equally, poor Matt Kuchar went the opposite direction. Yeah. So, okay. So I want to get a few little bits of housekeeping together here for you. First of all, we are live right now on Facebook Live, so please feel free to check in, leave your comments. We want to hear from you. If I am able to catch you come on, I will definitely say hello. So we really want to hear from everybody on this topic. It's an important one, and so we hope that you'll check in.
And folks can call in as well at 323-284-7826.
Also, Eira mentioned my hat, and so our topic today being about speaking out on social issues and social injustice. I felt like the closest hat I had to express that.
You needed to take a military stance?
Would be my military hat.
I like it. It works.
I kind of likened it to being slightly militant, which in some cases, as we'll talk about, these situations can raise that. Right. So that is the story behind the hat this week.
Well, and I wore a hat just to be on your team.
Thank you.
I wanted you to feel supported.
I do. I always do by you. Thank you. Right. So let's get on to the topic because we have a lot to talk about. When we were researching this topic, it's not, again, something that is new. Athletes using their platform to speak out about social injustice has been around for a while. I think probably one of the most famous athletes that in recent history, meaning in the last 100 years, but in the last 75, 80 years, we could look back to Jesse Owens in the 1936 Olympics when he accepted his gold medal. Saluting the American flag against a backdrop of his competitors who won the silver medal, raising, the Heil Hitler to except theirs to their leader.
Right.
It was a very tumultuous time, obviously, previous to World War II. But in that moment, Jesse Owens made a very big stand and continued to do so throughout his career. So it's not something that's new. It evolved then into the 1960s, where famously Muhammad Ali stood up for equality and for a voice from African American athletes.
Sure.
Putting together the Cleveland Summit in 1967, that many famous athletes from across sports joined him to talk about the issues and to raise the profile of Black athletes.
Yeah.
And not only that, how blacks were being treated in America at the time, which we all know was, again, a very...
an issue then and certainly an issue now.
It continues to be.
Yeah.
So it's definitely... Oh, and Charlie Davis just checked in and reminded us about Jim Thorpe as well. Thank you, Charlie. It's something that athletes have been doing. We go into the 1970s famously. We posted about her this week on our distillery Facebook page, Billie Jean King,
sure,
who famously stood up for women's rights in athletics and challenged Bobby Riggs, who was considerably older than her, but male nonetheless,
sure,
to a tennis match where, he bragged that she could never beat him. And she, of course, came out and did so. And again, an activist throughout her career, always fighting for the rights of women. So it's not something new. But I think what is very interesting, and one of the articles that I read off of AP was a fascinating and in-depth article about what's different today.
Yeah.
And I would love to hear your thoughts on it. We talk about social media a lot. We use it. Reluctantly by some.
Reluctantly by some. Is that jab?
Wasn't a jab.
So much
the facts,
changed.
man.
No, it's true.
It's
true. I'm not quite as out there on social media as some. But anyhow, yes. I mean, a lot has evolved. Certainly, we've the topics I think have changed a bit. Where there were early on, it was legitimacy and access and respect and human dignity, and now we're looking at. Still, all of those issues are still very prominent and still an issue for us to be, discussing. But what's evolved, I think, also is how much more access our professional athletes have today. Not just in terms of social media, like you mentioned, but I think also in terms of their celebrity status. Because sports today, I think sports always has been looked at as a religion, but today it is a religion like we've just have never seen. And there's money, there's celebrity status, there's far reach, there is just access to so many more people. So now you say one thing across your social media platforms and you've reached massive amounts of people worldwide.
Yeah, and I agree. I think the term was non-secular religion is what sports is today.
Yeah.
And it's coupled with not only the reach of social media, but the stature of the athletes, the wealth that they have, the voice in a lot of ways. Yes, the teams do govern what the athletes do, especially, and this is one of the conversations that we had over lunch this weekend, which I'll bring up in a little while. But
a very exciting heated lunch.
It was a very exciting
heated
lunch.
But
while the teams do, their employers and their athletes have to live to a certain standard, or they're expected to live to contract and all of that. The reality of it is the athletes are now dictating a lot more than they used to be as well.
Right.
And a lot of the topics that are coming up are much broader, in a way, societal issues. And in a funny way, some haven't changed, sadly. I mean, some of the athletes we'll talk about today are fighting for similar things that Muhammad Ali and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and others were fighting for in the 1960s, although on a different level.
Yeah.
I feel like the stature that athletes have, I could argue gives them a different level of responsibility. I don't know how you feel about that, Eira, but I really do believe it does give them a different personal responsibility.
Yeah. No, and I think, and that's an interesting question. I mean, over the weekend, this lunch that you referred to, I think so many issues came up, but I think I don't know that I'm always necessarily concerned with whether the message is right or wrong, whether or not I agree with it. But I think what fascinates me is just that do professional athletes have an obligation, a responsibility to use their platform and say something, whether or not it's a message that I happen to agree with. But do we, as fans, look at these athletes and say, beyond the game, You're being paid huge amounts of money. You've got huge access to people all around the world. Do you have an obligation to step up and say something?
I think obligation is a strong word, my friend.
It is a strong word, but
It's
what do you think?
I don't think anybody has an obligation to stand up, even when they have a platform to.
Yeah.
I feel like it's such a personal choice. One of the reasons, and again, I want to bring this up a little bit later, is when you do take a personal stand like that, you are risking your own, stature within your sport.
Yeah.
You could be risking contract. You could be risking
and the backlash that comes.
The backlash.
I mean, you sort of move beyond, just simply making a statement, and now you get to be questioned. Are you a patriot, for example?
Exactly.
So
exactly.
it moves beyond just the message you want to deliver, but is there more to it? You're criticized personally. There's a personal attack against you.
Well, and there could be a personal attack, and somebody's going to start looking in deeper into your background to see if actually you have what's in your closet right now with social media and the way that the media works in general.
Right.
Unfortunately, we want to go out and find out the worst about people. So you put yourself out there.
Right.
And
finding out the worst in people somehow questions the legitimacy of the message that they were focused on to start. I mean, I'm thinking of Chris.
Which I want to get to.
Yeah.
Chris Colway, because I want to get to that in a bigger conversation. But so I think obligation is a really, it's a slippery slope a little bit.
Yeah.
I think if you feel passionate about something and you really feel like what you are going to say and what you're going to do is going to have an impact in a positive way, and you're willing to put yourself out there, for sure. But obligation?
Yeah.
I don't know. Jarvis, obligation or not? We need a third voice.
Obligation, responsibility. It's just a nice thing to do.
Jarvis is going,
Jarvis says,
leave me out of it. I'm not saying. I do not want to take this moment to make my own personal stand about social issues.
I love it.
I'm watching Charlie Davis talk to us a lot, which is great.
What's
we
he
love
saying
it.
to us?
He says, looks like John McEnroe is setting up for a return battle of the sexes with Serena. Oh, she's really going to go there? That would be
wild.
Well, she would kick his tush right now. He's about 30 years older than her at this point, and she's maybe pregnant. Maybe pregnant.
I don't know.
That would be hysterical. Okay, so I think just generally speaking, I feel like the atmosphere that we are in right now with media and with social media really gives athletes a powerful platform, one that they don't have to take, but for sure a powerful platform that if they do take, let's look at what the pitfalls or what the successes are. And we've chosen a few athletes that we really connected to and what the message is that they are saying. And we wanted to say a little bit about that. So, for example, last year's ESPYs. Prior to the ESPYs, there was a lot of unrest because of a couple of police shootings that clearly were not maybe properly done. I don't want to say one way or another. They were against one young man, and it sparked a whole load of protests, and it created an organization called Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it resulted also in an attack on 5 policemen in Dallas where they were shot and killed.
Yeah.
There was a lot of unrest going on in the world, and Carmelo Anthony, a famous NBA player, decided enough is enough, and he really felt strongly that something has to change. And so he came out with a couple of personal statements on his social media, really highlighting the fact that, things have to change. I'll read a little bit about it. No more sitting back and being afraid of tackling and addressing political issues anymore, he wrote. Those days are long gone. We have to step up and take charge. We can't worry about what endorsements we're going to lose.
Sure.
Or who's going to look at us crazy. I need your voices to be heard. We can demand change. We just have to be willing to.
Yeah.
And that sparked a call from LeBron James to the producers of the ESPYs to see if they could make a united statement on the ESPYs at the start of it, which
they did and was very powerful.
Which they did and was very, very powerful.
Yeah.
And it was one of those ones where of the different scenarios that we looked into, I felt was almost like, in a way, the most united, the easiest, the, you know, in a proper form, I don't want to say proper forum, but in a forum where it was going to be embraced,
Sure.
given everything that had happened,
Right.
with not a lot of political agenda.
Yeah.
And I felt like, you know, it did have an impact. Now, interestingly, I could argue that it had an impact for the night, and people got a lot of press, and a lot of good came out of it. How much beyond that? Now, all the players that participated, LeBron James, Chris Paul, Dwayne Wade, and Carmelo Anthony, are all very generous people. They give back to the community. But, you know, a year and a bit later, it's almost exactly a year because the ESPYs were last week,
Yeah,
or
exactly.
2 weeks ago. You know, how much
Really
it changed,
right?
and how much impact did they have? And that's one of the things that I wanted to ask your opinion on, because, you know, it was very, very impactful. But do athletes just come out and say, okay, I'm going to wave my hands and say this isn't right?
Yeah.
And then step back.
And step back, exactly.
You know,
What follows that up?
What follows it up?
Right.
Do they need to follow it up?
And I would say yes, because again, this is we're talking about a very different day and age where the athletes have not just the ability to be able to say what they want to say and have people sort of, you know, stand behind them and support them and give them the platform. And for the ESPYs to be able to give them the stage and say, come on and say what you need to say is a huge testament to the power of these stars.
Oh, for sure. The fact that they can make one phone call and the ESPYs is going to change their opening.
Right.
It was right at the front of the show.
Yeah.
I mean, it was,
they'll change their plan. They can, you know, that's the beauty of it, is that these athletes can now they can rally the troops in a way that just wasn't the case, you know, decades ago. It was so much tougher. So now that you have that ability and you've made the statement, you know, what is the call to action? So when you're saying enough is enough and you can't sit back and you can't do anything, what does that mean? You know? Yeah. What exactly are you what openings are you creating for people to be able to step into and say, so this is how I'm going to make a difference?
Well, and do the openings exist, but when the story goes away, right? You know, and the media doesn't pick up, or if there isn't something that is tangible immediately thereafter.
But this is what we know: the stories don't go away, because again, in the 30s and the 60s and the 70s, this was happening.
Right.
So
it's just
2017. It's still happening. The stories, you know, this doesn't go away. So again, have we made progress? You know, have we made a difference? If not, what needs to shift?
How do we keep going?
Yeah.
How do these athletes continue to make an impact? And I have to imagine that many of them donate money to different organizations that are doing that. I mean, do they have to do it? Do they have to continue to be a loud voice, or is it enough, you know, just to get the endorsement? To get the endorsement
to support the organizations who are involved in the calling actions, you know, and actually out there doing the tough work.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, it's interesting because living in the UK for 10 years, you know, it used to be if you could get one of the royals to just put their name on something, then it really, and it still does. It has a huge impact whether they go out and do anything for you or not. You know, just the fact that they've kind of done that stamp of approval.
Yeah, it means something.
It means something. So I wonder if a lot of athletes, and Chris Kluwe was definitely actually one of them, who gave a stamp of approval, and it had a definite impact. Yeah. You know, is it just about the stamp of approval? Is that enough?
And for some, it may be. You know, I think it's you know, up to each athlete to figure out what worked for him or her. You know, am I willing to simply make a statement and leave it at that? Am I willing to simply, you know, post something through my social media platforms and leave it at that? Do I want to go a step farther? You know, I mean, you look at someone like Colin Kaepernick, who's, you know, look, the guy has taken a lot of heat, right or wrong. Whether you agree with the message, whether you agree with the delivery of his message, the guy has suffered some huge repercussions. You know,
and this was the topic of discussion at our lunch.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that you segued into that. I think this is a more difficult one to discuss rather than, you know, what these amazing basketball players did at the ESPYs. And I think it's what was so interesting to me in researching Colin Kaepernick, because I actually, when it was all happening, I can tell you exactly where I fell out. I was like, I'm sorry. That's just not right. It's not right. As you are famous for saying, it's just not right. He's an employee of the 49ers.
Yeah.
They're a part of a National Football League.
Right.
He's highly paid. Yeah. he probably, and I don't want to say this because it's not fair, and I'm sure in his life he has been the subject of discrimination. I'm sure he's felt it. I can't put myself in those shoes, so I don't want to say it. But, you know, right now he's leading an amazing life as a starting quarterback for the San Francisco 49ers in the NFL, a rare occurrence. Right. And he did that, and I got to tell you, I was totally outraged. Yeah. I really was.
I know, I remember.
I could not see it any other way. I felt like he was spoiled. I felt like, you know, he really wasn't connecting to what the message was. That by not standing, you know, in this country that allows him to make the money that, and allows many athletes who come white, black, Asian, it doesn't matter what ethnicity. Right. So many athletes in the United States are given the opportunity to come in and make a lot of money, make a life for themselves that they couldn't do anyplace else.
Right.
I was really upset.
So you felt standing for the national anthem meant that they somehow had more respect for the fact that they could play their sport.
And I think that it was a respect for the organization that hired them, right? That gave them the opportunity. Yeah. Respect for the country that allows, and when you think about it, there are many people from other countries playing in the United States that have the right to play here because of what the flag stands for. Yeah. So yeah, I was pretty annoyed.
Look, and I get that, and clearly you weren't alone. But I think there's something to be said for someone who is willing to say, I'm gonna make a stand, and I'm gonna speak my mind, and whatever the repercussions are, I'm willing to face them head on. And that was the case with him. You know, I don't know that you have to agree with the message.
No.
To understand that he suffered the consequences. He still is suffering the consequences, and. Look, I think you have to also just consider the fact that it's beyond a song. You know, what he was fighting for, what he was standing up for, is the fact that this country promises that everyone is going to have the same rights, that everyone will be treated equally. And when that is not what's happening in this case, I think it's okay for someone to say, whatever my platform is, I need to bring attention to that. So now that's a separate issue from what I completely agree with you on, which is the fact that, yes, he has an employer who has a code of conduct. And when you sign a contract to work for that employer, you agree to adhere to the code of conduct. Completely agree with that. Now, he's not asking anyone to change that code of conduct. He's just saying, I'm going to stand up, and I'm willing to suffer the consequences.
Yeah, but he could have stood up in a lot of different ways. It might have been more powerful, because what he ended up doing was stirring up such controversy that I wonder if his true message really made it out there, because people were blinded by the action. Because
that's what I loved in the article we were researching when Kareem Abdul-Jabbar says, so many people were outraged at how unpatriotic he was, and yet people don't seem to be nearly as outraged over the fact that what's really unpatriotic is the fact that these issues we've been dealing with for all these decades are still a problem. Right. And he still has to stand up and say, hey, let's draw some attention to what's going on. So what makes someone unpatriotic?
Exactly.
Discriminating. Mistreating the people that are that have a right to be here and live in this country and be delivered the same rights that everyone else does, or the fact that he decided, I'm not going to stand for a song.
Right. So I wanted to say that after doing research for this and reading a really actually incredible article that was published in the Washington Post and written by Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who I highly respect, been a fan. Like I mentioned in our last show, I've been a Laker fan my whole life, and my introduction into the world of basketball was at that time when Kareem was playing with Magic, and so it was like, I have so much respect for him. So I read this article. We both read this article, and I was absolutely not only blown away by what he said, which I'm going to share in a minute, but it actually changed my position, and I was very, very, like I said, I was mad. Basically, what Kareem was saying, he compared it to another moment in sports history that was going on at the Olympics in Rio, when an Army Reserve Second Lieutenant Sam Kendricks who was a pole vaulter, mid-sprint, going up for one of his vaults that goes towards him. It wasn't a practice.
Yeah,
it was towards his medal competition. Heard the national anthem playing, and he stopped mid-sprint. Yeah, which as anybody who does any kind of sports, I can say it from my golfing background, when you get stopped mid-swing, it completely throws you off.
Yeah.
So he stopped and he saluted. And he got a lot of praise for that. More than he ended up winning the bronze medal. Yeah. But he got more praise.
Still noteworthy, but this was
which is actually
much more impressive for so many people.
Yeah. Yeah. So Kareem was putting out there in the world that actually Colin Kaepernick is no different than Sam Kendricks on any level. Right. In terms of his patriotism, in terms of his expression of that patriotism. Yeah. And I just, at first I couldn't believe it.
Why? What was the disconnect for you?
Again, Sam Kendricks took his moment to stop something that obviously means a lot to him. He worked very hard for, to acknowledge the fact that the national anthem was playing. I know that, listen, I come from an era where, anytime you heard the national anthem, whether it was in school or you stopped and you put your hand on your heart, and if you had a hat, you took it off. Yeah. So, he's doing this in the midst of a competition. And Colin Kaepernick was basically, on the floor saying, I'm not acknowledging it. Yeah. So I, at first, was a little shocked by what Kareem was putting out there because, to me, the two don't seem to be equal.
So what was the switch for you? What did you come around to seeing? I mean, first of all, he is in Rio competing for his country. Yeah. Okay.
No, I know. And the switch came because Kareem pointed out that patriotism comes in many fashions and in many ways, and that it isn't about whether you are a patriot because you cry at the national anthem or because you believe in the red, white, and blue. Patriotism, at its core and its root, comes from standing up for what you believe and taking a risk in order to express it. Sure. And both men have had something on the line. Yeah. Sam Kendricks had a medal. Yeah. Colin Kaepernick, his career. Right. And so in those moments, how are we to judge that one is better than the other because we like the way they expressed it better? Right. And it was interesting because when you really, and sadly, I will say, I didn't really, at the time, give Colin Kaepernick the benefit of doing research to see exactly what he said and why he was doing it, because I was so furious, and I think a lot of people were. But basically what he said is there are a lot of things that are going on that are unjust. People aren't being held accountable for, and that's something that needs to change, something that this country stands for: freedom, liberty, justice for all, and that's not happening right now. Yeah. So his emotion probably comes from the same place that Sam Kendricks. Yeah. It's justice for all. Yeah. So when I read that, I kind of went, wow. It was an aha moment for me.
It's interesting. It's interesting. And I think it's happening for a lot of people, at least I hope that's the case, because I think again, it's less about whether or not you agree with the message, but do you believe that people have the right to be able to speak up?
Right. But interestingly and sadly for Colin Kaepernick, he's now a free agent and he's still looking for a job as of this show. Yeah. Nothing's happened in the last 24 hours that I'm aware of. Right. And there was another really very long and intense article about why that actually might be in Sports Illustrated.
Why he hasn't been picked up?
Why he hasn't been picked up. Yeah. And it really, it kind of came off the back of, I hate when I do this, who was Michael Vick, criticizing Colin's hairstyle, saying that
if he cut his
hair, he'd get a job. So this was kind of one of those things that was in response to it. Yeah. And, taking it step by step as to, at the end of the day, what's going on? Why don't any teams want to pick him up? And does it have to do with the fact that he has been perceived as a troublemaker, right? As a distraction, as unfocused, and that's why he wasn't playing well. Yeah. And at the end of the day, and it was interesting because the author, Michael Rosenberg, basically countered every single one of those arguments.
Yeah.
Really countered it, saying, he's in great physical shape.
Sure.
He's a great quarterback. I mean, come on. He's like one of the best.
Yeah, he's a
for
huge
sure.
talent.
And he's, was he a distraction when the writer asked some of his coaches and teammates? They said no.
Yeah.
He really wasn't.
He really wasn't. Yeah.
But look at the backlash. He still doesn't have a job.
Right.
And the bottom line is Colin didn't do a good job. This is what the writer's saying. He didn't do a good job of spinning his position, or talking to the press and being open to the press.
Yeah.
And so there is a perception out there that is preceding what his talent is. Yes, also there's only 64 quarterback positions in the whole league, and 20 teams already have their starting quarterback position filled. I mean, there's like lots of other reasons.
Exactly.
I don't know, Eira, what's your view?
Look, I again, the guy was willing to take some huge risks, and whether or not that has anything to do with why he hasn't been picked up, how do we know for sure? But the interesting question would be, to sort of be able to ask him if he were to do it all over again, considering what's happened with his career, would he? And I just have a sense that he.
I think we should write him. I think we should write him and find out, because I think that it's, that's what Kareem was saying.
Yeah.
Right? When you're willing to put it yourself out there, and maybe he would do it again.
Right.
Then, you're willing to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't take it back.
Exactly.
The reality is you can't take it back. And I just want to say our friend Ashley has joined us. Hi, Ashley. Thank you for tuning in. We appreciate it.
Love it.
Charlie, you've stopped talking to me. Come on. I want to hear your thoughts.
So what happens when an athlete takes a stand? And it's a good stand, and people seem to support the stand, and people are in agreement with you. And then you start to take a look at the personal athlete's life and his history and what's in his or her closet. And for some people, they say, hey, your private life doesn't necessarily match the message you're putting out there.
Well, we have an example of just that. I'm so glad you brought it up, Eira. So there's a former football player with the Minnesota Vikings named Chris Colway. And he was asked by an organization who was at the time fighting against the Minnesota state legislature on banning gay marriages. And they asked him if he would speak out and endorse their position.
Sure.
Which he did.
Happily
did.
Enthusiastically.
He is not gay himself. He's married and has kids. And he was very, very happy to help, because it's something he truly believed in. Yeah. And he went out and spoke publicly on behalf of the organization. He signed petitions.
Sure.
He used his platform in the off season to promote the cause. And there was some, I shouldn't say some, negative feedback from coaches.
Yeah.
Although the organization, the owners of the Minnesota Vikings supported him.
Yeah.
He claims at the administrative staff and coaching level that he was given a lot of heat. He was not allowed to play. He had an injury that he needed to take care of in the off season, and was assured going into the off season that he would be coming back. And then through the NFL draft and some free agency, he was a punter that other options became available, and ultimately he lost his job and wrote I read the whole article, very, very scathing article against the Minnesota Vikings and what happened to him.
Sure.
And flat out saying, I lost my job because I stood up for these people. And then he went in, and then a few weeks later, the headlines read, this is from CBS Sports, Chris Colway can't be moral crusader after his cruel Twitter rant, and goes on to talk about and show many of his tweets, and also some of his own personal behavior in the locker room, which the reporter got through interviews and talking. I won't repeat some of the things that he allegedly did because, not very nice and actually not very much in support of the LGBTQT community.
Yeah.
So basically, even though he ended up in a court battle with Minnesota Vikings, he settled.
Yeah.
Donated all the money that he settled to the organizations that he was supporting. So he didn't take any personal profit from it.
Right.
He was really called into question.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because when Eira and I talked about who we wanted to talk about, you brought up Chris Colway.
Yeah.
And I went ahead and started doing my research. And the first article I found was not any of the good stuff.
Right. It was this.
It was the negative article.
Yeah. And we had a moment like, is this someone we want to really give a whole lot of attention to? We went back and forth and we figured, again, does the fact that in your private life you might not be, 100%, does that take away from the message that you have delivered or the attention you brought to a message?
Eira, you see it. You have a clarity when you look at issues. They're very you can say that, but the fact of the matter is then his personal life was looked into.
Yeah.
It totally diminished, and even not only totally diminished it, it was he can't represent this if he's going to do this.
Right.
So it was a slaughter on his whole message from the very beginning.
Yeah.
And while you can, or I can be very logical and rational about it.
Yeah. It did take away from the message.
It took away from his message.
Yeah.
Not only did he leave the Minnesota Vikings, but was not picked up by any other team. Ultimately, he had a little short run, but he never got back into the NFL, and he was still viable. His career was viable. He was still kicking well.
Sure.
It's a really double-edged sword, and most people, and I hate to say it with media nowadays, most people are going to take that headline over the
absolutely
all of the other things that he was talking about.
Yeah.
So again, I come back to what's the point? Why would an athlete want to stand up and say anything?
Yeah. No.
I mean, let's take a vote.
That they're going to be scrutinized.
Yeah.
And everything that they say or do, whether or not it's public, is going to be, brought to the surface.
And can be a total public embarrassment. And not only that, it seems as if this reporter, and I don't know if this is true, so I'll say it that way, but this reporter was looking for something. He picked up on some tweets, and he's like, okay, let me dig.
Right.
Let me dig, and let me see, and let me... So, in a funny way, I could very much argue that athletes maybe shouldn't say anything because...
You open yourself up.
Well, you put yourself into a position where your voice then gets completely, sidestepped or overshadowed by what you do.
Right.
And I know that can happen in any case, anytime any of us stand up.
Right.
But it's because...
But knowing that could happen, does that mean that we shouldn't stand up?
I think it makes the decision harder. I have to tell you, I really did some of my own internal thinking about it because, there's definitely, causes that I'm passionate about.
Right.
But how often am I willing to put out my voice in a way, that could risk my career?
Right.
Would I really do it? And I hate to say it, that I don't know that I'd jump in.
Yeah.
I really don't.
Yeah.
So I feel like the athletes should be really applauded on a lot of levels, but I also feel, I understand why they wouldn't, given where we are with social media, where we are with news media, and how the perspective always seems, let's come from the dirt.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's come from the dirt. And we can have a nice moment like on the ESPYs, which is very controlled and not taking anything away at all from what they did at the ESPYs. But that's like a very controlled, very beautiful way of standing up.
Yeah.
But when it comes to Colin Kaepernick, I really I applaud him. Now I applaud him.
Yeah.
That took guts.
It took guts. Yeah, absolutely. So keep going.
Yeah.
I think the athletes should keep it up.
Well, I think also in the last 2 or 3 minutes that we have, I wanted to also touch quickly on the fact that, we've done this whole show on professional athletes, and I'm really hoping at some point we will be able to talk in more detail with a professional athlete that has taken a stand. This topic isn't going to go away because it, first of all, issues don't go away, and there are a lot of athletes that really are passionate. But I did want to comment that we forget that many of us are standing up for our causes in different ways, right? So anytime you are...
And nobody is perfect. And there is oftentimes a disconnect between our private and public personas. And, that's part of human nature, I think. And while we would all like to believe that we can reconcile the two personas, it's just not always the case. And so I really think people should. If you feel compelled to speak up, take a platform and make a statement and do whatever you can, because we've got issues across the board that have to be addressed. So
one of the ways that people do it, and the home athlete does it, is to run in marathons or in half marathons or 5Ks for their cause, fundraising issues. That happens all the time. So that's a way that those of us who are athletes but not superstar athletes can contribute to the conversation. I wanted to point out one really interesting organization that I found, started by Jeremy Jones, pro snowboarder, who started an organization called Protect Our Winters, POW, because they're obviously concerned about global warming.
Exactly. He went out and rallied his fellow professional athletes, and they decided to come together and bring attention to, not just bring attention to, but do some real specific, tangible work.
If you go on their website, to affect
global climate issues.
It's a very loud voice, and they push and they show up at rallies, and they really push for governments to consider all of that. So there's lots of ways that athletes, whether you're amateur, whether you're professional, whether you're making $30, $40, $50 million a year, or you're not making anything, you're just like Eira and I who work out, and there are ways to take a stand. And I think that at the end of the day, as Eira, you're saying, it's worth it. It's worth it if you believe in something. I know we have to wrap up in a minute. I want to thank Jarvis. Thank you, as always, for your supple hands and for helping us out and being our security blanket. I want to thank my co-host.
I want to thank you, Wendy.
Who always keeps me on my toes. We will be back in 2 weeks. I believe that is August
1st?
No.
Is it?
No. The following week. August 8th. And our topic is going to be something that I am sadly going through right now, and that is slumps. What happens when athletes go through slumps, both personally and like on a home athlete level and on a professional level? We see it happen.
Yeah.
I could argue that Colin Kaepernick went through a slump during this whole time period where his game was off. And we're going to try and bring in a couple of athletes and also psychologists that might talk about or trainers that talk about how to get yourself out of that slump. What does it mean when you're going through one?
Yep.
And like I said, I find this fascinating because I think any of us who have been out there trying to even work out, when you go through one, it's so hard to get back. We hit roadblocks.
Absolutely. So Tuesday, August 8th, 3 p.m.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us. For those of you who will listen after our live show, we really appreciate it. You can find us at thedistilleryinc.com, on Facebook at The Distillery Inc. We're now on iTunes, so you can subscribe. And we are also on YouTube at Distill It, a 360-degree view of life in sports. So you can check us out. Please like us, and we look forward to seeing you.
Thank you, everyone.
In 2 weeks.
In the future, talk radio will actually educate, inspire, and make you think. The future is now. Topics and music that affect your life from Universal Broadcasting Network. Tune in at ubnradio.com.